I just try to address these point by points with the caveat that, really Professor Dasgupta has read the book very carefully and thought about it substantially. And I'm answering on the fly, and yes, I worked on this for a number of years, but forgive me. So, with the caveat that I'll have to keep thinking about some of these questions, I would say that, with respect to the first point about the narrative of the 1947 onwards period, I suppose there could have been a little more parsing in terms of my own narration of that period with respect to the fact that you're trying to balance on the one hand what actually happens, right, and the construction of a dominant economic imaginary, and trying to give your readers a context of what it is that these guys are responding against, rather than a standalone, like somebody once said, look, you should do this as a standalone piece about, Indian political economy 1940 to 70, that sort of thing, and rather than as part in chapter 1 of your book, which you could start with like Lord Bala. So I think that's one thing. I completely understand that I have there are certain sources that I have not included, and those are mainly kind of blind spots of my own rather than a willful kind of a thing. But I accept that. But there are also others that I feel that I have been able to. Earlier period of social scientific literature that have tried to be attentive to, for example, like O.V. Malyarov's book or A.H. Hanson's book on planning and this sort of thing. But again, it is something that I welcome as a sort of suggestion because any historical work will be missing out things, and it is something that is important to kind of widen the consciousness that has fallen out about some of the earlier, but particularly, as you say, as relates to the next point with respect to positionality of where I'm standing. And I have attempted to try to be as capacious as possible, but there are simply things about 1960s APW and this sort of thing that either for not having read Professor Dasgupta's footnotes carefully enough, or for whatever reason, the genealogy, as far as I've tried to sketch the genealogy of where these ideas or contributions come from, without and thereby try to prevent erasures that take place, particularly erasures that often take place in the Western Academy of people who are working here and in other parts of the world. It is something that I think is a tension, is a problem, and it's not something that I have to make any excuses for. Only to say, except to say that to think about this as a broader problem, abstracted away from my book. What I'm trying to do with respect to this project, Archives of Economic Life in South and Southeast Asia, is to basically be able to present a kind of common space for people to one, kind of share ideas about what we're doing, and to kind of share ideas about what we're doing together, and try to facilitate certain kinds of conversations such that these erasures don't take place in as we go forward. Trying to leverage whatever we can from open access, digital sources, etc., so that people become aware of some of these things. For example, there are sources for in Shodh Ganga, right, which I've consulted extensively, which operating 15 years ago, I would not have known about H.T. Sharma's Swatantra Party in Gujarat dissertation, which was published in 1993, because I wouldn't have known it existed. I wouldn't have known where to go. Right. So I think that's just a project that I have to continue to work on, but it's an important one. So I thank you for that. So yeah, I think the question of socialist, right? What that means, etc. And the fact that it is characterized as a socialist economy, but it's not actually socialist. And it kind of ties into the third point, which is with respect to mixed economy, right? It is a mixed economic model, but there are two things. I mean, one is in opposition, right? I have to start to call you some kind of name. So I start to call you a particular kind of name, and also it's not just what you do, but it's also what I say that you're going to do. Right, and so the characterization, I suppose, as a work of scholarship by tracing the opposition, right, and not necessarily tracing everything about the operation of the state, there are potential kind of slippages that happen. But again, I would say that in the spirit of debate, the point is also to clarify not the impression or the mode of operation given, but what is given off as well, to be sort of rubbing off on it. Right? And so I think that is something that perhaps I could have parsed a little better, but this was very much the motivation. With respect to the bank nationalization issue, and whether that was actually demanded by capital, right? So I think that actually aligns well, because ultimately who is the one seeking the compensation? It's like R.C. Cooper on behalf of the depositors, right? And so these are the small. I mean, these are not the large firms who have given or whatever, taken big loans or whatever, given bankrolled these banks or whatever it is, right? The large depositors. These are sort of petty bourgeois Parsi kind of group. So I think that actually aligns well. And then this sort of on this point about mixed economy. So there's some great new work that's being done about mixed economy, right? By Amy Offner and other people, which is about how even in the heyday of what was considered to be welfare and development states, right? Many of your so-called like big public sector, heavy state enterprises are actually like subcontracting a lot of things to private capital, and these big projects are being decentralized as well. And one of the classic examples is what is often in conventional wisdom thought of as the great American big infrastructure project, which is the Tennessee Valley Authority, right? It's actually David Lilienthal who goes to Colombia to Bogota, and then advises through the sort of Cauca Valley Corporation, this program of decentralized development in which private interests are essentially, building some kind of damming and all of that for the region, right? So I think that there is a larger question about what are the different pieces of the puzzle that fit together in the mixed economy, which I think is not an question that I can answer, but it's a question that has to be submitted for wider sets of work, and that again deals into what are the different. It's a sort of more precise characterization of the different types of mid-20th century states, right? And then kind of finally, this point about, I suppose the penultimate question, which is about the other political parties. So I think one of the challenges of writing this book is that it's difficult to say how much was Swatantra Party itself doing that was original, how much was also being done. So as I mentioned in the book and as I encountered, communists are doing the same thing in terms of with respect to prices. And the distinction is, of course, that Swatantra is tying into a different type of politics, and that their politics are, in a sense, not interested in some of the questions that the communists are involved in, and they are tying into their particular kind of free economy ideology. But I would be very surprised if the communists were not doing this in a much more successful way than the Swatantra people. There would be much more people in line in the crowds are doing this sort of thing, right? So that is another thing. And I do think that they speak to each other because they're different sides of looking at a similar kind of thing, even if they would never admit it to each other. And interestingly, there is an alliance of in 1967 Swatantra DMK coalition. That alliance of non-competition includes the communists, which I think is interesting, particularly because when he comes into office as Premier of Madras State in 1952, first thing that Rajgopalachari says is, hey, communists, I am your enemy number one. So it's ironic that by 67, that for the sake of bringing down the Congress, there are certain things that he counterbalances, right? Especially with this other bugbear, which is the Dravidian movement. Okay. Now the final question is a tough question, right? Can we untether the kind of caste basis of kind of capital accumulation and this issue of Hindu property, patriarchal Hindu property laws, customary laws, this kind of thing from free market? Well, I suppose that one, and particularly with the question of pragmatism, because one could give a cop-out answer to this and say that, look, on the ideal type, right, your ideal type free market as theorized by Hayek or whatever it is, right, all of this stuff can be said that, look, it not to matter, right? But is that something that we ever find? And the argument or the suggestion that I made is, well, we're thinking about a pragmatic politics in the present. I would say that, for that, if you believe that where we stand in 2023 was always where we were headed, right? Then I would say probably not. But if you believe that there is a possibility to at least roll back a little bit, or roll back so that we don't have the kind of excesses we have now, then I would say that at least these things can be stopped in their tracks and perhaps co-opted one way or the other to perhaps less nefarious ends. So that's all that I would say. But I think it's not a conclusion that I'm making. It's a question simply because I'm not the revivalist for Swatantra, right? It is a question that I'm trying to pose.